1. The Fall from Providence Spring, year 909. 5 years ago, Seleucia City. Imperial Palace. Guard Chamber. Oh, come on. A large armored man laughed, while throwing half a dozen dice onto a wooden table. The man opposite him grinned, and his blue eyes glinted as he leaned back. Guess your luck with dice is as bad as your luck with women, Decimus. Fuck off, Shank. You're just lucky, Decimus replied, and grumbled into his bushy beard. Shank was a giant of a man. He was a head taller than everyone else around him, while still maintaining a bulky physique. This, combined with the relentless training he received as a royal guard, made him a threat to any intruder. The man opposite him was only a bit smaller, and specially selected as a guard. They were both palace guards of the Seleucia family. The family was the ruling family of the kingdom of the same name. Its history dates back 909 years. This guard duty is getting more boring by the hour. Decimus sighed and stretched his limbs, as if anyone would ever attack King Aurelius. He shook his head with a smile. He's too nice. Shank nodded, stood up, and grabbed his spear. He is. But even nice people make enemies, especially kings. Then he walked outside to take up guard duty in front of the king's chambers. There he switched positions with another guard and watched the staircase that led to the chamber. The hallway on his left led to the guard chamber, where the other guards rested. Shank's father was a palace guard as well. He trained him from a young age. He felt very grateful to his father, especially whenever he saw a boy without a father figure to look up to. His wife, Mirabella, was a beautiful woman. He smiled to himself and shook his head. I'm one lucky bastard. As he said this, he felt his head tilt forward, and darkness enveloped him. He woke up an unknown time later and groaned. He was lying flat on the ground, his nose broken and bleeding. He had his eyes closed. His thoughts were still off track, and he was confused. Where am I? What happened? He exclaimed groggily as he propped himself up and wiped his face. He had been knocked out plenty of times before. His head felt like it was going to explode, and the back of his head hurt like a bitch, as his father would say. Then, after a minute, realization slowly dawned upon him as he saw the doors to the chamber open. He froze in place, and his entire body started heating up and sweating, and his chest felt like he had a knot where his lungs were supposed to be. I've been knocked out, he said stupidly, with eyes wide open like a deer in headlights. Inside the room, there was darkness and silence, yet a peculiar smell reached his nostrils. He knew it all too well. Blood. He panicked and struggled to his feet, propping himself up with his spear. He couldn't believe it. Why me? Why did it have to be me? He struggled to stand, and his knees started applauding like crazy. Then he slowly took a step inside. The full moon shone inside the chambers, and everything looked normal. Yet the smell became more intense. He saw the bed of the king and his wife, with a large, splendorous canopy and curtains, blocking his vision. By now he was even more anxious, but slowly walked forward, past a table with fine golden goblets and wine, over a red carpet from the southeast, and towards the bed. He stood before the bed and took a few deep breaths. No matter what I do now, I'm fucked. So I can check if His Majesty is well regardless. He consoled himself and pulled aside the curtain. Then, once more, he froze before he collapsed onto the ground, unconscious. On the bed lay the king and the queen, peaceful in each other's arms. She had her head on his chest. The only thing off was a large gaping wound in the throats of both monarchs. They lay in the bed as if nothing ever happened. Yet, the thick smell of blood filled the entire room, and the white silk had soaked itself with the dark red color of blood. They must have held on to each other in the moments they were killed. The open window let in a fresh breeze of air that made the curtains gently sway in the night. King Aurelius had left behind an heir, the 6-year-old Augustus. Yet the king and his queen weren't the only things that died on that day. Some, even years later, spoke of this day as the end of the kingdom. Tiberius Epicrotia, a mighty noble, became regent, drove opposing noble families out of the city. It would be known as the fall of Providence in the history books. The king is dead. Long live the king. Or not. Present autumn, 914. Southern border. One swing after another. He brought the tool down onto the golden ears, bundling them up and placing them behind himself. He was a good mile from the village, way out in the fields. His hair was blonde and cut short. His body was skinny and pale. His blue eyes became slits as he looked at the sun. His movements with his sickle were experienced and nimble. This is wonderful. I could harvest crops all day. He was 14 years old. He looked up at the sun and sighed before sitting down to rest. After another 15 minutes of work, the sun was starting to set. He started counting how much he had harvested today and nodded satisfied. I'm making good progress. If I keep up this pace of harvest, then I will successfully bring in all the grain within time. He smiled before shouldering his harvest and heading back to the village through the field. By now, it had become rather dark. The sun had gone down, and as usual in autumn, darkness set in almost instantly. He was almost halfway back, about 500 meters from the first houses, when he noticed something. There was a weird light. What's that? It's night, so... Oh my God. That's fire. It's burning. He thought to himself, dropping the wheat and starting to run. A good 200 meters away from the houses, he could hear women and men screaming and weapons clashing. Weird grunts he had never heard before mixed with the screams and wails the wind carried over. Faust had turned into a statue. The village, it is getting raided, he muttered before pictures of his mother, father and sister flashed into his mind. He gulped, and a tear rolled down his face. He had long since heard of border raids. Orcs, or dwarven mercenaries, had started raiding after the fall of Providence. But they had never dared to come so deep into human territory, so he and his family thought they were safe. What do I do? What do I do? He panicked and started thinking, I can't go there. I'll just become another victim. I don't even have a weapon, but I can't leave my family there. He struggled with himself for what seemed like an eternity before making a decision. I'm going to keep my distance and watch. I'm unarmed and can't do anything, not to mercenaries or orcs. He slumped down and fought his tears as he crawled closer to look. He was now barely 100 meters from the first houses, one of which was where he and his family lived. He quickly attempted to run closer but hid when he noticed 4 orcs moving towards his family that stood in front of their house. My father is standing in front of mother and sister. He is trying to protect them with his life. He felt his heart ache when he thought about it. It was his family after all. His father, his mother, his sister. The little girl cried bitterly, and her mother held her dear, calming her. Faust's father threw a nervous look over his shoulder. Faust could see the resolute expression on his face. He did not show fear in the face of death, only a grim determination to protect his family. Oh, father. A lump had formed in his throat when the 4 orcs slowly drew closer and pointed their weapons at his father. His mother covered behind him with his sister in her arms. They were about to close in on the spearmen. What do I do? What can I even do? There must be something. Faust thought frantically, but his brain didn't work properly anymore. He couldn't do anything. He knew his father would have wanted him to survive. 2 of the orcs charged forward at his father, who promptly killed one of them by stabbing its throat. But he had multiple opponents. The second orc screamed before slashing the man's chest wide open. I know, say. Before the beast could slash out another time, his father retracted his spear, and with all his might shoved it into the head of the armored orc. When Faust was about to celebrate, he heard his mother shriek out loud. Then he saw it. An arrow had penetrated his father's face and could be seen sticking out of his eye. No, father. Tears flowed down Faust's face. What will happen to mother and my sister now? He panicked, yet there was nothing he could do. I am too weak. If only I were stronger, I would send those orcs back to hell. He clenched his fists so hard they bled as the orcs slowly closed in on his remaining family. Then they started screaming like crazy. It sounded horrible. The only thing worse than the orc noise was the heartbreaking wailing of his little sister. Why her? She's only 8. Why couldn't we just swap places? Why? One of the orcs opened the door of the small wooden cottage, and the others pushed the women into the house before throwing the doors shut again. What are they doing now? Wait. They couldn't be so cruel. No, they wouldn't. But before he could finish his thought, one of the orcs swung his arm and threw a torch onto the dry straw roof of the cottage. All thoughts Faust might have had were replaced by a deafening silence. No thoughts. Just pain. He couldn't move or think as the orcs barricaded the entrance. The fire slowly spread from the roof to the walls, and it didn't take long to hear his mother slamming against the door. Please, please, let my daughter live. Please. The selfless pleading only increased. Then Faust felt. It increased further when her pleadings turned into screeches. Agonized screams. Every single one of them etched themselves into Faust's mind. Each of her screams Each of her screams made his sanity slip further into darkness. Revenge. That's what he needed. Every scream would be an entire orc tribe eradicated, he swore to himself. It didn't take long for his sister to join her mother's concert of pain. It took way too long. He could even hear them knocking against the door, trying to escape, but the flames continued to eat away at the house. And after 5 minutes, the screams stopped. His thoughts darkened. All that filled them were thoughts of revenge. He wanted to eradicate orcs. All of them. Nothing could be heard anymore except the fighting and screaming from other parts of the village. His mother and sister were dead, burned to death in their own house. His father was killed, attempting to protect them. Faust watched the entire process in tears, and finally broke down on the ground, unable to deal with what he saw. I, he stammered. Dear mother, dear father, Lilia. He gave in to the pain and heard their screams over and over again, carving themselves into his mind. Then suddenly, everything was silent in his ears. He couldn't hear anything, but his heartbeat was like a powerful drum. His entire body heated up, and he clenched his fists until they bled. He saw a picture of his family before him, hugging each other and laughing. Then a bestial laugh resounded in his head as the picture was eaten up by flames. Exhaustion and mental fatigue took over as he fell over onto the ground. It was all too much for him. Darkness enveloped him. 2. Bloodhand Tribe. 914, southern border. Near Poplia village. It was late already when Shank rode through the night, with 30 subordinates by his side. He wore chainmail, an open helmet, and a sword on his back. In his hand, he held a long lance. The other riders had the same equipment as they rode through the night on the plastered roads that were so common in the entire kingdom. It was an achievement Aurelius and his predecessors had been very proud of. The smell of horse and leather was in the air, and Skenk, now 31 years old, was the commander of this small army heading towards Poplia village. An hour ago, a man from the village had arrived at Vostrom Castle, his fief as a baron, and reported an orc raid on Poplia village before collapsing on the ground. Dead. He ran for hours, sprinting, ignoring all pain and exhaustion, until his message was handed over. Shank immediately ordered the departure of the cavalry to relieve the village and rescue whoever could still be rescued. And so, 30 riders spent the last hour riding like crazy to reach the village as fast as possible, in the hopes of finding survivors. But in their hearts, they all knew that after an orc raid of this size, the chance of finding survivors was slim. Orcs be damned. As if Tiberius's schemes weren't enough of a headache. Now, the Bloodhand tribe must pillage villages. Those poor people, Skenk thought. One could see a scar on the right side of his face, stretching from his eye to his ear, that hadn't been there 5 years ago. He had barely changed except for the scar. A beard, and growing a few years older. Sir, is it safe to assume that the raiding orcs are from the Bloodhand tribe? Lucan, Shank, second in command, asked while riding next to him. Shank nodded grimly. They're closest to the border after all, and they're much more aggressive than the other tribes nearby. I just never expected them to attack Poplia, sneaking by our outposts. He grunted. We should prepare for a skirmish if there are any looting orcs left behind. By now, the bulk of their army should have left already, Lucan said grimly before continuing. As much as I hate to say it, our comrades in the villages have almost certainly found an untimely death by now. I know, Shank replied with his teeth clenched. They have probably burned the villages and taken slaves already for their sacrifices, Lucan added. I know, Shank roared before continuing calmly. I know they're probably all dead or taken as sacrifices. I fucking know. It's like 3 years ago. Don't remind me. Ever since we destroyed one of their camps and found the state of the prisoners there, I can't go a single day without thinking about it. God damn it. And if there's even a sliver of a chance that there's someone alive, then we will search for that person. After hearing his lord vent, Lucan gulped and looked to the ground, ashamed. I'm sorry, my lord. I didn't mean to trigger bad memories. Shank sighed. Stop talking about bad memories. We're about to make some more of them, he added before looking ahead. We're at the end of the long straight road. A bright light was visible. Village ahead. One of the soldiers reported, and the group of horsemen spurred their horses to increase their speed further. They soon reached the town, and what they saw wouldn't leave their minds for a long time. 30 to 40 houses, set aflame, slowly burning down. But there was a certain smell, nauseating and sweet, putrid and streaky, like leather being tanned over a flame. In the middle of the village, one could see a large pile of corpses from as far as 200 meters away. 200 people or more, thrown onto a heap and set aflame. As they came closer, the smell intensified. One of the younger soldiers vomited off his horse. One could still see the traces of bitter fighting around the small fortified building on the village square. The horsemen stopped in front of it and gathered. Lucan's face was pale, and one could see he had trouble dealing with what he saw. On the side of the heap, one could make out faces of women, children, and guards. Most faces were already molten, as the skin and flesh slowly came off the bones. Yet some were still intact, and one could still see the emotions they felt when they died. Many soldiers took off their helmets in a minute of silence. An entire village, Shank mumbled to himself in a daze. He had seen similar pictures in the past, yet this picture was even harder for him to endure. Even more so for the inexperienced soldiers among his ranks. None of them were inexperienced in combat, but few had seen atrocities like this committed. It must have been a fucking army, not just a raiding party, Lucan said, his voice devoid of all emotion. He had also seen his share of things. Skank nods. An army, armed with bows and spears. Well forged, he replied as he rode to a corpse, still lying on the ground in a corner. It was an orc. A spear penetrated its chest and stuck out. Its body was covered in well-crafted leather armor, and next to it lay a spear with a black metal tip. The orc's face was humanoid, yet not human. It has red eyes in a deep socket. The facial bones were very pronounced, and one could see the sharp teeth in its mouth as it lay on its back, with the mouth and eyes wide open. On its hairless head, one could see the red-colored symbol of their tribe. a large hand painted all over its face and head. Bloodhand tribe. As I thought, Schenk mumbled before beginning to issue commands. Istvan. Come over here, he shouted, and a lightly armored man with only a bow on his back rode forward. He still seemed pale, yet determined. Milord, he says. He's barely 16 years old. Ride to Reducium as fast as possible and inform Earl Alexander of this immediately, he coldly ordered. He inwardly sighed. Alexander, my dear friend and overlord, peaceful times are over. The young messenger nodded and turned his horse to leave. As you command, milord. Schenk turned to Lucan. Set up a party of 5 to track down the orcs and pursue them. If they stay in our territory, make them report their movements. We will react accordingly. Lucan nodded and disappeared, with 2 more men. Schenk then bellowed a loud order, shaking the startled soldiers, and their training took over. They had been drilled to listen to orders so much that their minds were torn away from the gruesome sight before them and to Schenk. Split into groups of 5 and began searching the village and its outskirts for survivors or orcs. Go, go, he shouted and gathered 4 of his men around him. The soldiers quickly grouped up and spread out into the village. I only hope that there are a few survivors. If there was nobody left alive. That would be too gruesome, he sighed. It really must have been an army. A few hundred, probably. Why would the Bloodhand tribe launch such a large attack? He couldn't figure it out. He rode towards a few buildings that had almost completely burned down and looked inside, only to find nothing but a few charred corpses. That's when he heard a chuckle from a few meters away, followed by intense coughing. As he looked over, he saw a dying orc lying there on the ground. He was smiling as he looked at Schenk and the soldiers. Too late. He had pressed out before cackling and coughing like crazy. Schenk slowly walked over to the orc, looking down at him. He looked down with disgust. Why? He asked the orc, who started to laugh, only to end up coughing again. The Bloodhand tribe will rise again. We needed more sacrifices. It pressed out as black blood gurgled out of his mouth. Sacrifices for what? Schenk asked, and stepped onto the orc's shoulder, who screeched as an answer. It only laughed, maniacally, before finally, all life disappeared from its eyes. Sacrifices for what? He shouted, and angrily brought his foot down onto the orc's face, squashing it with the heavy boots. He was obviously unsatisfied with the answers, yet also needed an outlet for the intense emotions flowing through him. Schenk looked up at the faces of his soldiers. He only saw grim determination. Split up and searched the perimeter on foot. He commanded them calmly and took another look at the house right next to the orc. It had burned down almost all the way. Inside, he could only see 2 indiscernible corpses that seemed to have clung onto one another. My God, a kid and one of her parents. He looked at the small body hugged by a bigger one. He knelt and had to think of his wife and daughter. No matter how many times one sees the cruel actions of the orcs, one cannot get used to it. He clenched his jaw. May such a calamity never befall my family. He thought quietly before a youthful voice startled him. A mother and her. A voice next to him said, in a husky voice. Schenk's head shot to his side, where he saw a young boy with empty eyes, red from crying. The boy stood still and breathed heavily. His sad eyes were fixated on the corpses in the house. Faust. Duh. 3. Southern Wall to say that Schenk was overwhelmed by the situation and didn't know what to do would be a great understatement. He was trained for all kinds of things, but to console a boy after. What could console a boy who lost his family and all his friends to the Bloodhand tribe in the cruelest of ways and saw their remains right before his eyes? Schenk was truly at a loss. He could only imagine what the boy was going through. He saw Faust as he was, a child who lost his parents. Schenk could only think of his dead son and young daughter, and their faces should he and his wife encounter such a calamity, and felt something he hadn't for a long time: empathy and pity. The emotions washed over his mind like a flood through the desert. Schenk stood up with a sigh, knowing that he had to console the kid and get him away from the sight and to safety. He walked over to the boy and put a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, kid," Schenk said, in a deep, emotional, and raspy voice. And rest no doubts in Faust. He meant what he said. Whatever you feel right now is more than justified. You were lucky to survive. Yet I don't know anybody who would want to swap places with you. No, Tari. The boy snorted. More time passed, and the night had turned cold. I feel so cold, Faust said and shivered. Only now did Schenk notice the blue tint on the boy's lips. He was shaking. After all, it was a windy autumn night, and the boy had spent hours outside with nothing to cover him but his working clothes. Schenk also noticed the malnourished body of the boy, and immediately ordered one of his soldiers, Agrippa, bring me your coat. Now, andameno tisal desendura. Ow, he said, in a calm yet demanding tone. Schenk had, in a weird way, started to feel responsible for the boy. The soldier brought over his long and warm coat immediately and handed it to his lord, who took it and placed it around the boy's shoulders. Faust continued staring at the corpses. He hadn't looked up at all during their conversation. After a minute, he managed to finally look away and at Schenk. His face didn't show any emotion but desperation, as he finally tore himself from the gruesome sight and jumped at the Baron, hugging him tightly and sobbing. Schenk was taken aback. He didn't expect this sudden change initially, though gradually understood it. The boy was hypnotized by the occurrences of the day before breaking it, and finally letting loose. This once more overwhelmed the man who simply hugged a boy and held him. After what felt like a few minutes, Schenk sighed. He felt his father's instincts more intense than before. Boy die. What's your name? He asked calmly. One could immediately feel the empathy in his voice. And so could Faust, who looked up and sniffled before calming down a little and answering Faust. Schenk considered something for a moment before continuing. "A nice name you got there, Faust," he smiled. "You're cold and malnourished. We need to get you out of here. Why don't you come with me to my castle?" He offered to the boy, who looked up at him and only nodded before hiding his head in Schenk's chest again. One of the soldiers, a veteran called Vitus, approached Schenk. "My lord, please let me take 4 men and bring him back to the castle. What use? Before the rest of the group. The kid needs a warm fire and a bowl of Mirabella's stew. He reminds me of my son. I'll take good care of him." Schenk can't help but smile slightly as his wife was mentioned. Schenk looked at Vitus and shook his head. "I will personally bring him back. The 5 of us will return ahead of the rest." He looks at the 13-year-old clinging on to him. "Let's go, Faust. We will get you to safety." Faust, still very quiet, looks at the corpses and the burnt-down house one last time before nodding silently. Schenk then led him to his horse, yet, on the way there, stopped walking. They were standing next to the orc whose face Schenk destroyed earlier. The teenager looked down at the corpse and the ugly face squashed under the Baron's boot. For the first time of the day, an emotion, other than sadness and lethargy, could be seen on the boy's face. Anger. His eyes glinted, and his breath grew rugged. He clenched his fists and spit on the orc's corpse. In his mind, it was boiling. What overcame his sadness from before was a flood of negative emotions and desires. Revenge. He wanted to eradicate all the orcs, vent his anger on them, and let them feel his pain. Why did they have to take his family away? Never again would the boy feel anything but hatred for those wretched creatures, he swore to himself. Schenk also noticed something changed in the boy's expression at that moment, but he only silently acknowledged it. After all, he had every right to be angry and vengeful. Besides, the Baron also cultivated a deep hatred towards the orcs, more specifically the Bloodhand tribe, as they have taken away many of his comrades and friends over the years. And if one took a deep look into the faces of all the other soldiers in the village, none of their faces showed something different. They all shared these thoughts. Everybody had lost friends or family to the raids of the cruelest of orc tribes near the border. Faust sat behind Schenk on his big destrier warhorse and held on to him as they rode through the night as a group of 6. Schenk, Faust, the old Vitus, and 3 more soldiers accompanied them. And back onto the plastered streets in the direction of its patriarch, Lucius Argoras, a tall man with long black hair, tied behind his head, stood at a long table with a map of the entire dukedom on it. Earldoms. One of said earldoms was called Vostrum, and its earl, Lucius's son, Alexander, stood on the other side of the table, both hands on the map, looking at the very south of his realm, where one could see Vostrum Castle and Poplia marked on the map. A red line A red line crossed out Poplia. Behind Alexander, who was a youthful man with an athletic body, clothed in a scarlet robe, stood a sweating Istvan. He rode as fast as possible to bring the news to Schenk's overlord, the Earl of Vostrom. Said man had a deep frown on his face. Eradicated, he mumbled. An army of the Bloodhand tribe. He then brings his fist down on the table with force. His father, a broad-shouldered veteran and famous general, also had a complicated facial expression at the grave news. Son, this matter isn't so easily resolved. We can't muster the resources to attack the Orc tribes on their own territory. Not with a civil war looming over us. Tiberius, that son of a bitch, hasn't made our life easier at all. He really holds a grudge over Antioch. He sighed. He sighed, yet a grin forming on his face. Nearly a decade ago, Tiberius Epicrotia lost to him in a dispute over the richest trade city in the kingdom. Antioch, taught. It was a city on the very east of the kingdom, where the dukedoms of Epicrotia and Argoris bordered the sea. The city had been an independent republic before internal strife dissolved it. Both dukes contested for the rule over the city, but the old king, Aurelius the Wise, had given the city to his old friend and marshal, Lucius Argoris. This had been the catalyst for the falling out between the former allied dukes. The north of the kingdom featured another dukedom west of Epicrotia, the dukedom of Lagitaria, another powerful dukedom that allied itself to Epicrotia in the conflict through marriage. Both dukedoms are tight allies. 4. Flash of agony daybreak, Earldom of Vostrom. Near Vostrom Castle, Faust spent the 3-hour-long ride in a constant battle with overwhelming fatigue, resisting the sweet promise of sleep in order not to fall off the galloping horse. He held on to Schenk tightly, who barely spoke. The cold seeped deep into his bones, making his body uncomfortably stiff. This cold is slowly getting the better of me. I must not fall asleep, he thought, pinching himself to remain awake. He had long since lost any feeling in his hands, face, and feet, so it didn't help. He sighed when the sun rose. The forests and fields on the roadside were covered in thick fog. Faust had no idea when they would arrive, and it made him anxious. He didn't know how long he would be able to hold on in his state. Of course, it didn't help in his fight against hypothermia, caused by the low temperatures and wind, that his body was so thin and malnourished that one could see the bones in his face and collarbone. Faust's mind grew hazy, and his field of view started shrinking when he heard Schenk's voice loud and clear, tearing him back to reality. We're nearly there, boy. Please hold on. The genuine worry and kindness in that statement gave Faust some hope and reignited his fighting spirit against the chilling threat of unconsciousness that would lead to his death. He looked around in an attempt to distract himself from the cold, and what he saw came as another relief. Houses, farms, a windmill, a bridge, people. Faust couldn't help but smile weakly. They had arrived at the foot of Vostrom Castle. Schenk rode his horse, driving it onwards mercilessly. He had long since noticed the boy's state becoming critical. The party of 5 passed through a town of maybe 800 inhabitants and continued to ride on a road that led up a hill. On top of that hill, Faust could see a massive structure of stone with towers, walls, and a path leading up to it. The hill was covered in grapevines, painting a beautiful picture. Faust was mesmerized. Beautiful. Such an imposing building. I've never seen anything this big and built of stone in my entire life. Who might live there? The king? He obviously had no idea about what building would be appropriate for a king. Yet, Vostrom Castle was very imposing. It could house several hundred soldiers and civilians. In case of an emergency, the entire town could be housed. In the castle, one could enter the first courtyard through a drawbridge that covered a 15-meter-long moat with no water in it. If one fell down the ravine below, their bodies would burst on the blank stone. Once one entered through the massive gatehouse, they would walk into the bustling first courtyard that housed mostly craftsmen, all the way from the baker to the blacksmith and the stables. It also offered a generous garden with beautiful greenery. A well could also be found. There were also practicing grounds for archers, a dueling arena, and other means of practice for soldiers. Once one followed the main road through the first yard, they would enter the main castle yard, where one could find the keep, food storage, armory, and barracks. Large towers could be found all around the core of the castle, and smaller ones around the much bigger first yard. The core was used as a retreat. All in all, the castle formed a well-functioning economy and defense. The only way up to the castle was on the way they came, the main road. The castle was cleverly built on a set of cliffs, so that one couldn't approach the castle in any way but the main gatehouse. It was truly a bulwark, and would be worthy of an earl. It was the pride of the Argoris family, and their retreat in case of war. All of this was only briefly noticed by Faust, who desperately held on to Schenk as they rode up the road towards the core castle. Peasants shot them curious glances as the horses rushed through the streets. They entered the core castle after bypassing a pair of armed guards. They halted in a large courtyard where they came to a halt. Finally, Faust mumbled inaudibly before slowly falling off the horse. He was too exhausted. Just holding on took more than he ever thought he could muster. Yet, the awaited impact never came. He felt two strong hands catch him. That's all Faust heard before darkness enveloped him. Ah, Garcir. Or at least it felt that way. As he tried to move, he couldn't move his arms or legs, and a female voice gently comforted him. Stay still, boy. Don't move. You're safe now. He could feel a soft hand on his cheek, and with a groan, he opened his eyes. At first, he couldn't adapt to the bright light. Yet after a few seconds, he could make out the silhouette of a woman. She looked angelic. An angel, he muttered, and stared at her with open eyes. He had never seen such a beautiful woman. She had long blonde hair that fell over her shoulders. Her kind blue eyes and smiling mouth, accentuated by her high cheekbones and milky white skin, enchanted him for a few seconds. Then she giggled at Faust's reaction and held a hand before her mouth. Oh my. She blushed a bit. Just the woman that saved you from the verge of death. She smiled and reached next to her. Faust blinked stupidly as he realized what he just said, and shame washed over him. I... He stammered. Oh no. Don't be. It was a compliment. As a reward, I'll feed you some food. She reached for a bowl and a spoon on a table next to her. They were in a small room about 3 meters high. He lay in a bed, cozily wrapped up in multiple blankets. The reason why he couldn't move. And looked at the beauty that sat on his bedside. She looked to be around 20. She wore a modest deep blue dress. He attempted to move slightly. Faust was hit by the intense pain he felt from his body slowly, regaining his original temperature. He groaned. The woman shook her head and reprimanded him. Don't move, boy. Your body is too weak, and the frost is still deep within your bones. Here, let me feed you some soup. It will warm you. She smiled and picked up the bowl and spoon, blowing on it to make it a bit cooler as it was still steaming hot. Faust gulped as his stomach growled. He hadn't eaten in over a day. The woman just smiled. Faust mustered his courage and looked directly at her. What's your name? When he heard his voice, he had to cringe. It sounded so weak and raspy. She didn't pay it any mind and smiled. My name is Mirabella. I'm the lady of Vostrom Castle. Now, stop talking and eat. She laughed and cautiously brought the spoon up to Faust's mouth. Before he even tasted the soup, his mouth started to water. It tasted heavenly. As he swallowed, he felt a warm sensation spread throughout his body, giving him energy. I hope you like it, she asks with a grin. She can see how much he loves the soup from his facial expression. Faust relished in the sensation before nodding with a bright smile, which almost immediately turned into a pained frown. This situation triggered something in Faust. Pictures of his mother forced themselves into his imagination, and he saw her feeding him soup while caressing his cheek when he was sick, nursing him to health. Then the scene shifted. He was back on the field, looking at his burning house from the distance. He had to watch his mother burning right before his own eyes. The agonizing screams resounded in his head like a mantra, hammering on his sanity. The process repeated until he was torn out of his fantasy. He was panting heavily, and he could feel tears on his face. Yet, there was another sensation. A soft embrace he found himself in. Mirabella had silently hugged him and pressed him into her chest. Shh. All is good. You're safe. Trust me. All is well. She consoled him. All he felt was emptiness. He couldn't even enjoy the hug from this beautiful woman. Thoughts of what had just happened haunted his mind. He felt his chest tightening, and a vast emptiness filled his heart. The sounds of his mother's screams replayed in his head repeatedly, until they got fainter and fainter before vanishing entirely. His breathing finally calmed down, and he stopped sweating. Mirabella still held him tight, speaking to him to console him. Her presence and heartbeat helped him calm down. Her warmth made him feel less lonely. She just held him with the kind of love only a mother could muster towards a child. She held him for a few minutes, Come. He could see a sad smile on her face. What was that? I had no control at all. It was as if I was back there, seeing it happen all over again. He could finally think straight again, more or less. He looked at Mirabella and could feel nothing but gratitude for this woman. She seemed to feel something weighing on his mind, and explained, "What you experienced is not a sign of weakness. It happens to the strongest after experiencing a traumatic event." Still, Faust was ashamed. Yet his shame was soon replaced by sadness and lethargy. Mirabella forcefully fed him the entire bowl of soup before he fell asleep exhaustedly. Mirabella stood up, looked at the boy. "He's just a boy." She picked up the bowl and quietly left the room, making sure not to wake up Faust.